It's a Tuesday. It's the 25th day of February 2025. Well, we're running out of days here in February. The last days of February are going to be kind of like what we've had over the last few days. We're going to have to deal with some very strong winds again. However, after today and through tonight, winds are going to ease a little bit as the powerful jet stream winds have been slamming the Pacific Northwest coast with wind and heavy rain and heavy snow in the northwest mountains of the U.S. begins to ease a little bit. It will be a touch cooler heading into tomorrow, into Thursday. That's going to help make the winds wind down a little bit. The winds aren't going to go away. They're just not going to be as intense and as strong. So that'll be good news. And with those cooler temperatures, a little bit of snow shower activity may hit the mountains, a few on the plains as part of the specific weather comes through. But really, when it comes to the precipitation, nothing to write home about. Then we kind of wait through the next several days and into the beginning of the weekend, and will continue to be dominated by Pacific air. We have seen huge contrasts, obviously, from the severe Arctic cold of a week ago. We got rid of that air mass, replaced by a very mild Pacific air mass, and that's basically caused temperatures to be 70, 80, 90 degrees different in some areas compared to where we were a week ago. And that'll happen, especially this time of year as we get to the tail end of winter now and kind of looking ahead towards the early parts of, at least the way the weather works, a spring pattern gets a little more springy and a little less winter. And that starts next week. A more complicated pattern evolves later this weekend and into next week, starting Sunday and going into next week. And then the next couple of weeks after, we're going to see the Pacific throw a lot towards the western United States. And the more waves, the more storms, the more fronts you're dealing with, the more complicated pattern gets, the more variability there's going to be. And also, the more of anything that you put into a pattern, the more it's going to be tricky in terms of trying to figure out day-to-day weather. So stay tuned. Still some snow there in northwest Colorado on the ground, even though very mild air continues to push in, and there'll be a lot more melting here over the next couple of days. Pacific moisture, though, you can really see it in the mid and high levels in some areas here over the last couple of days, and so that's led to beautiful cloudscapes again, some lenticular clouds, and kind of going back to where we were before the Arctic wave. Snow, though, will be found in some of the mountains, as you can see here in Mount Massive, southwest Colorado, as Pacific air hits the mountains and produces some mountain snow shower activity. And then, boy, the ice is thick in the Dakotas, enough so that you can have four-wheel races on the ice. Now, when we take a look at the satellite image, we're going to show you two satellite photos. We see the swirl of clouds here coming into Seattle. Just very powerful winds. I mean, hurricane force winds, as you'll see in a minute, hitting the Pacific Northwest coast. Very energetic and moist jet stream wind. If you wonder why it warmed up so quickly, when you have wind like that off the Pacific, it just drives in. And that's why temperatures have moderated so much. This little patch of moisture did have some showers with it late yesterday and overnight, just some sprinkles and flurries. But this system is losing a lot of its moisture over the Cascades and the northern Rockies as it heads east. Now let's zoom out a little bit. Let's go further back and take a look at the Pacific. So here's that little disturbance. Here's the Pacific wave. But then out in the Pacific, we have these strong storm systems beginning to form kind of along a wave train here, as we call it. We showed you very strong jet stream winds yesterday, and that's going to lead to another day of high winds. We have wind warnings and wind advisories for the I-25, I-80 corridor into the Panhandle of Nebraska. It's going to be plenty windy in South Dakota, parts of North Dakota as well, as the winds will get a little bit further out onto the plains. And there you can see the winds overhead today. Now, they're not nearly as intense as I showed you yesterday, but they're perpendicular to the Continental Divide. Perpendicular winds aloft that are strong to the Continental Divide makes it windy on the plains and through the wind gaps, we call them. So it'll be another windy day. Now, stepping back again, zooming out, this is a global perspective of winds across the hemisphere at 300 millibars, roughly 30,000 feet. And if you look from a global perspective, the strongest jet stream winds are in the Pacific right here. and starting to see some waves forming along. And that's what I just showed you in the satellite imagery, those waves forming in the Pacific. So this is going to be an area, a breeding ground of weather in the days ahead. You're not going to notice this over the next several days. What we're trying to do here by showing you this is kind of play the long game with the weather forecast, which is, okay, when we see this, this is going to initiate change later. So this is something where you just have to make sure you take a bigger look at the weather. A lot of times we show you maps that only show this. Sometimes we got to show you maps in a bigger perspective to understand what's coming down the road. So they're looking at North America. There's today's little wave coming off the Pacific coast rather rapidly and zipping on through. And then by Friday, this is by Friday, the weather will be busiest in the northeastern United States, the upper Midwest, and the northern Great Lakes. This little low here is part of the low pressure system breaking off the main jet stream flow and coming into Southern California. This is part of the weather getting more complicated. While high pressure comes into the Pacific Northwest, giving Washington and Oregon and Idaho a break in the weather, and a lot of really areas here in the Intermountain West. As we get into Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, it's going to be very quiet, very mild, very nice. This low here is going to break off, come into Southern California, then trek across Arizona and New Mexico. It's going to move slowly, so that's going to give it time to draw in some moisture. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be some rain and snow along the path of this upper low between the time frame of Friday, but especially over the weekend. So that'll be something to watch. This guy up here is going to take a dive south and it will initiate the change in the weather. And then that's going to lead to bigger things down the road. Here are the wind gusts between now and tomorrow morning. So you can see the wind getting further out onto the plains. You see a lot of yellow and darker greens here. Notice most of the wind is along and north of Interstate 80. Winds not as strong in Colorado or Kansas. Just gusty winds like you normally get this time of year. But look at these wind gusts. We talked about hurricane force winds into the coast of Washington and Oregon. Woo! When the Pacific starts to get rowdy like this with these strong winds, especially this time of year, that's going to lead to quite a bit of weather. But this is all over the next 24 hours. After this, we'll see the wind speeds relax, not be nearly as intense. This is what the precipitation looks like between now and Friday morning. So a little bit gets out into the plains, but the heavier moisture into the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. Really not much going on elsewhere other than a little bit of mountain snow shower activity. By Sunday morning, that closed low I showed you on Friday, which was off the coast of California, is around Santa Fe and is going to be turning northeastward, headed up towards Nebraska. Now, it's not going to be a really big system, but what it will do is probably produce some moisture along its path, even into Sunday and Monday, into maybe eastern Colorado and northwest Kansas. This guy comes in and digs behind it and will become the stronger low as we get into Monday and Tuesday. So we're going to have to see what happens with this guy. We'll put a question mark on it because there's several different configurations in terms of what this storm could do. It might just be a minor wave coming on by. It might slow down, pick up some moisture, and produce some upslope because it will track further south. So the low kicks up to the first leading wave, goes up into the Dakotas, and here's the second system trying to get organized in the Four Corners area. So Monday, Tuesday time frame, front range areas of Colorado and Wyoming, out into the plains, may actually have some upslope starting with this system. And that's really what you want to see in March to get the moisture started. So we'll see what happens. Too early to tell. I'm not even going to show you precipitation maps because there's just too much in the realm of question marks on what this system will do. It will be followed by more waves, as you see here, in the Pacific wanting to come through. And these really strong Pacific jet stream winds will be able to force them off the Pacific into the west coast instead of maybe meandering up into Canada. And we see that this is Monday, Tuesday. This is by Friday. It's another one. And notice it's taking a similar path. So next week, we probably have a couple of systems that could be of a little bit of a larger scale. And notice they're tracking now a bit more to the south. So most of the weather that's going to be, quote, interesting is going to be next week. If you look at temperatures over the next 7 days, look at these temperature anomalies between now and Monday of next week. Pretty warm. The warmer trend that is developed will really be across most of the nation. But once we get into next week, party's over. This isn't any Arctic air intruding into the western United States. This is just much colder air from the North Pacific wanting to come in. Instead of air that's a little more moderate Pacific air, this is air from the northern Pacific, which is quite a bit colder. So you can see that next week's temperature trends start going the other direction. Have yourself a great Tuesday. We'll see you tomorrow.